Hello, I'm David Way. I'm Battleship Iowa's curator and historian here at the Port of Los Angeles and San Pedro. We're a floating museum memorial warship attraction. And we were closed like many other people during the virus COVID shutdown. We opened up 2 weeks ago to the public. We were open 7 days a week from 10 to 4 p.m. and final doors are closed at 5 o'clock. We mainly just have the electricity for a full tour on Saturday and Sundays, and then a limited tour on the weekdays. On the weekends, we have an engineering tour, a gun tour, and a president's tour besides our normal tour of Battleship Iowa. And we want to give you a brief tour of the ship today. These are Battleship Iowa's main battery. They're called 16-inch 50 caliber guns. They were the largest guns ever placed on an American battleship, along with her three sister ships, New Jersey, Wisconsin, Missouri. The only other naval guns that were larger were the 18-inch guns on the battleship Yamato and Musashi. Actually, America did have an 18-inch gun, but with the development of the hard-hitting 2,700-pound projectile, Iowa saved 25% in weight in the armor and also in the gun system by using the 16-inch shell, which had really great results. Those massively armored turrets weigh 2,000 tons. It takes 660 pounds of powder to fire a 16-inch shell. This is the smaller one. It's 1,900 pounds. It's for short bombardment or soft targets. The guns sit on what's called barbettes. These are massively armored. The range of armor thickness and the segments surrounding the gun systems range from 17 inches down to 12 inches, and the total weight of some of the barbettes are 67 to 70 tons. Iowa is basically a floating tank with giant guns. We're standing on Iowa's stern now, or fantail. Iowa's aviation history took place here. In World War II, there was 2 catapults, port and starboard, and a center crane. This was the era of float planes. She initially would launch off Vought Kingfishers, and later on, the final float planes of the United States Navy, the Curtiss Seahawks. We've tried on several different occasions to find a Vought Kingfisher with no luck, and we also found that there's no surviving Curtiss Seahawks. The era of the float plane with the U.S. Navy ended in 1949. Their job in that era was to launch off. They could rescue downed aviators in the water. They could also go on anti-submarine patrols, as well as a radio relay, and they could radio back the aiming of the guns. They would spot the falling of shells. There was kind of a love-hate relationship with the officers and crew. If you knew where you're going into combat, you would fly off the planes either to another ship or to a coral atoll or island, because if the aviation gasoline exploded at nighttime during a battle, you would be a lit up target, and you didn't want to have that situation arrive. In the 1950s, both catapults were removed. They kept the centerline crane on board, and this was the era of the early helicopters. Iowa had assigned to her a Sikorsky horse, and then there were other helicopters that would come on board. One of them was the Paiseki Hup, and we were fortunate about 3 years ago to have one of those donated to us. During the 80s, Iowa would refuel and do some minor maintenance of other helicopters that were familiar and flying in those days. Hueys, Seahorses, Super Stallions, all the helicopters that were flying for either the Army or the Navy would land for various reasons: supplies, replenishment, VIP taxis, anti-submarine patrol. So they had a very busy aviation section here on Iowa's fantail. This is our Paiseki Hup helicopter. None of the other museum memorial battleships have one of these. Some of the museum memorial aircraft carriers do have Hups on board. They were mainly used for plane guards on aircraft carriers and also VIP taxis. We're one of the early tandem rotor helicopters. The rotors were actually made out of wood. We have those. They're stored underneath turret 3. This particular helicopter first flew for the French Navy. We believe she was in their part of the then Vietnam War Later on, she was used by a commercial French company to inspect pipelines. Then she went to a Dutch aviation museum as part of their collection or put on display. Then there was a collector back in Philadelphia that purchased the helicopter, and he had intentions to put her back into flight worthiness, to use her as something he would fly around. We acquired the helicopter from the Philadelphia, actually Piasecki factory, and this family donated the helicopter to Iowa. Our restoration team has painted her in Korean War colors. I do have pictures of a Piasecki Hup landing on Iowa's stern. Also an interesting picture where up forward with the two 16-inch gun turrets, with the turrets both turned in different directions, there's a Piasecki Hup that landed on turret 1. I presume that the stern was full of helicopters, so they just landed on top of a turret. So a very interesting photograph. But we're really pleased to have this helicopter on board Iowa, and we plan to bring more on board when the opportunity presents itself. We're standing in what's called the captain's import cabin. The captain usually spent most of his time when the ship was in service in sea cabins. There was 2 of those, one behind the 04 bridge and another one behind the 08 level battle bridge. This VIP reception guest cabin is famous for hosting President Roosevelt in 1943, November, as he journeyed across the Atlantic along with his war cabinet staff to the Tehran and Cairo conferences. Inside this compartment, the war cabinet staff met with Roosevelt, and they prepared for the approval from Churchill and Stalin the plans of the Second Front, the Normandy invasion. Also, over the years, we had then Vice President Bush give the commissioning speech for Iowa's 3rd commissioning, and also during that 1980 periods, President Reagan and his wife Nancy used Iowa as the review ship for the 100th anniversary of the Statue of Liberty. And further aft here, we have the captain's import cabin. It's rather dark. We have the electricity off today. This is where President Roosevelt stayed. And further aft, we have the special bathtub that was installed for President Roosevelt. We believe it was the only bathtub ever installed for a president. There were, however, other warships that had bathtubs on board, so we're not unique in that aspect. We're standing on Iowa's 04 level conning tower, or armored conning tower and bridge area. The helmsman stands behind 17 inches of armor. There's little slits here forward, just like you're in a castle, and you can see where they would stand. In World War II, the first commanding officer, Captain, later Admiral McCrae, he never even went to his sea cabin. He actually had a little cot here and slept here, so he'd be instantly on call to come to the assist or be notified of any activities that warranted his attention from the crew that was on board or staffing the bridge. For all 4 of the Iowa-class battleships' modernization in the 1983 era, they removed the 4 aft 5-inch 38 twin gun mounts, and they added 16 Harpoon missiles for anti-ship missile attack. They had a range roughly at that point in time of about 75 miles. And then they also added 8 armored launch box units that carried each 4 Tomahawk missiles, 32 in total. The Tomahawks, again, at that point in time, had an anti-ship range of about 250 miles, and then a strategic range, both conventional and nuclear tipped, of about 1,500 miles. This deck was added for the installation of the 4 aft Tomahawk armored box launchers. And we also have further aft, tracing back to the World War II era, a Mark 38 optical rangefinder, and you can see the radar teardrop on top. The forward one sits on top of the superstructure. These optical rangefinders would be feeding information to aim the 16-inch gun turrets, and that information was relayed down to the 2 battery plot rooms on the 3rd deck below the armored horizontal deck. This last February, Battleship Iowa celebrated her 75th first commissioning anniversary. She participated in World War II, the Korean War, and the 80s Cold War. Now we've been open 8 years as a museum memorial attraction, and we'd love to welcome everybody here for a visit.